Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Ajax Public Library's Top 10 Tips for Tenants presented by the Durham Community Legal Clinic. My name is Julia Campbell, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at the Ajax Library. I just wanted to start by covering a couple of quick housekeeping items. Today's presentation is being recorded, so I would ask that you please keep your microphones off so that you are not heard in the recording. We will have a Q&A portion at the end of the presentation, at which point I will stop the recording to protect everyone's privacy and so that everyone feels comfortable sharing and asking questions. And at that point, please feel free to unmute yourself if you wish to do so. We have a live transcription of our program today, so if you would like to turn on the subtitles option, you can do so by clicking Live Transcript at the bottom of the screen and show subtitles. And the chat button is there if you have any questions or comments you would like to share. You can feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation, and they will be addressed either during the presentation or at the end. And you have the option of chatting with everyone, or you can send a private message to me, Julia, or to any of our presenters this evening. If you have any technical difficulties today, I recommend that you exit the Zoom and re-enter. And if you continue to have difficulties, please place a comment in the chat, and I will do my best to assist you. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters from the Durham Community Legal Clinic. We have Ashley Somerville, Danielle Scheffel, and Austin Campbell, who are all paralegals with the Law Society of Ontario. They are passionate about community development work and committed to working within the legal system to improve and advocate for legal issues. Welcome to Ashley, Danielle, and Austin. We are very happy to have you this evening.
Thank you, Julia, for having us. We appreciate doing it. We missed doing these over the last year. Again, my name is Danielle, and I am a licensed paralegal with Durham Community Legal Clinic in Oshawa. We are located at 200 John Street West. It's the Midtown Mall. Just to give you a little bit of a background when it comes to the clinic, we do several areas of law. We do housing, social benefits, WSIB, human rights, and we have a hub as well located at our Midtown Mall that does small claims mostly, and consumer law. And the hub is run by students from Durham College. It's part of their program this year. So we have several of them attending and helping us. The legal clinic is also now starting to do wills and power of attorney. So if you're interested in that, we'll provide you with the phone number at the end of the slide. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask us. We'll try and answer them as best as we possibly can. And thank you all for joining us. We appreciate that. And I will pass it on to my coworker, Ashley, and she can start the presentation. And like I said, if you have any questions, you can put it in the chat and we'll have somebody monitor them and we'll try and answer them as best as we can. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So like Danielle said, my name is Ashley. I am also a paralegal at the Durham Community Legal Clinic. I've been there for 3 years now. And so tonight what we're going to talk about is the top 10 things to know about your tenancy. And so these are the top 10 tips that will hopefully empower you and give you some idea of your rights as tenants. And so we'll just get right into it. So if you want to switch the slide, we'll start with tenant associations. So tenant associations, it is an offense under the Residential Tenancies Act. The Residential Tenancies Act is the governing legislation between landlords and tenants in Ontario. It is the law, and it has all of the rules and offenses outlined in it. And so it is an offense under the Residential Tenancies Act if the landlord interferes with the tenant's lawful right to form a tenants association or to file their disputes at the landlord-tenant board. Now, having said that, what is a tenant exactly? So a tenant is someone who rents a unit, a house. It can be a part of a house, but there are some conditions attached to it. So if you are sharing a kitchen and or bathroom with your landlord or anyone in your landlord's family, so like their daughter, their son, etc., you will not be covered under the Residential Tenancies Act. And so you are not actually part of what we're speaking about tonight. So keep that in mind. If you have any questions about that, we'll be more than happy to answer those at the end. But in terms of a tenant association, so what that is it's when tenants in a building, so typically an apartment building, they all get together and they form an association to deal with their concerns about the common areas in the building. The landlord is not allowed to interfere with that, so they can hang up flyers and hold meetings, all of that stuff, and the landlord cannot interfere with that. They cannot rip down your flyers, they cannot interfere with your meetings, and if they do so, that would be reason to file an application with the Landlord Tenant Board. So tenant associations, if you want more information on that, you are more than welcome to walk in. We do have walk-in hours Monday to Thursday from 8:30 a.m. to 4 p.m. We will go over that again at the end if you missed it, but we are more than happy to give you more materials on tenant associations if you wish to walk in, because there's a lot of information on them. And then I'll turn it over to my colleague Austin to go next.
All right, so tenant and landlord relationships go both ways. Both sides have their own responsibilities. And a lot of people don't know what the responsibilities of their landlords are, because landlords will sometimes incorrectly put things that they have to do onto the tenants. So landlords have to provide you with a rent receipt. And for a lot of people, if they're doing something like electronic transfer, this doesn't end up being too crucial. But for a lot of tenants, they get stuck paying cash and they don't trust their landlord to keep track of it. So you are entitled to demand rent receipts. The demand should generally be put in writing so it can be traceable and you can present that fact that you made that demand to an appropriate authority if it comes to that. Likewise, with regards to leasing, after 2018, about mid-2018, I would say April, all tenancies are required to use a standard form lease provided through the Ontario government, and you can find that lease in a variety of places online. In such a tenancy, you are allowed to ask for the landlord to use that lease. If they don't, there could be specific consequences, and it is important, especially because the lease makes it very clear and easy to follow. It's much better than, say, an informal agreement that a lot of people do make with their landlord. As I said, if the landlord refuses to give you a copy of the lease within 21 days, you can withhold rent. But you can only withhold up to a month of rent, and ultimately any rental arrears do have to be paid if they comply with the demand to use the standard form lease. In the event that you were in one of those tenancies that began before the standard form lease was mandatory, your landlord has to provide a name and address and a contact number. The address must be where they can receive documents that you might need to mail them, or complaints and notices, that sort of thing. If they don't provide that, then the same rules apply as with regard to the standard form lease, where you can withhold rent. Cover winter evictions as well. So there is a persistent and damaging myth that sometimes makes its way around that you can't be evicted during the winter. While Canadian winters are bad, sadly, you can still be evicted during the winter months if there is a valid eviction order out. The sheriff will evict. So aside from the obvious standard holidays like Christmas, New Year's, you can be expected to be evicted during the winter months, and it's something you need to plan around.
And just to clarify, if I may, on that, Austin, in regards to between Christmas and New Year's, Durham Region Sheriff is the one that they decided that they won't evict during that time. In Toronto, they still can evict you. They are not as, I guess, have a heart of gold like our lovely sheriffs do here in the region. So just so you know that, yes, the sheriff can evict. They just take the time that the kids are off from school to try not to evict during that time.
Keep going, and visitors, so something about pets, and this is something that a lot more people are knowing these days, but it is still comes up as an issue a lot. No pets clauses are unenforceable. This is written into legislation. A landlord can't prevent you from having pets, but that doesn't mean you get free reign either. If you have a pet, it many ways works the same way as a visitor. It can, if it damages the unit, or if you live in a sort of shared tenancy, you have other tenants, other people in maybe the same building, and it starts interfering with their ability to enjoy their unit, it can become an issue, and it can lead to you being taken before the board. So that is something to consider as well. I'll let Ashley explain interest.
Sure. So Interest must be paid on the last month's rent deposit that you pay your landlord at the beginning of your tenancy. The interest is paid on the anniversary date of move-in typically. So there was a rent freeze in 2021, so no interest would be paid and the rent would not increase. So the interest typically matches the rent increase amount. And so what that means is that your landlord's not going to cut you a check for the small amount of interest each year. What they're going to do is they're going to top up your last month's rent. So your rent increase and your last month's rent match. So at the end of your tenancy, there's no difference between your last month deposit and your current amount of rent. So that's how most landlords do that. And like I said earlier, it's typically on the anniversary date of move-in. However, that can change, and I'll explain why in the next slide. So rent increases. So again, in 2021, rent increases were frozen. However, they are going to be back into place for 2022. We'll go into further detail about the exact amount in a moment, but in terms of rent increases, the landlord can raise the rent on the anniversary date of the move-in. So example is if you moved in on August 1st, it would be done for August of the next year. The increase must be given in writing 90 days before the increase date on a form called an N1. Unless they have all of the criteria met in the N1, it must be on the N1 itself. Illegal rent increases that aren't challenged within 1 year become legal. So this is actually a newer change to the Residential Tenancies Act, where it's being deemed that if you're paying an illegal increase charge for 1 whole year, that now becomes your legal rent going forward. So it's really important that you keep track of that. And if there's any kind of illegal charges and you're not sure, give us a call as soon as you become aware, and we can see if we can do anything about that. So again, in terms of the anniversary date, that can be changed because, like I said earlier, there's a rent freeze in 2021, which means that a lot of landlords are now deciding to raise the rent for the month of January 2022, the first month that they can raise the rent. They are allowed to do this because there was a rent freeze, so your rent has not been raised for more than 12 months. So that's the reason it could potentially change. Any questions, if you're unsure about it, definitely give us a call. We would be happy to clarify and review anything that you've received from your landlord in terms of that. If the landlord wants to increase your rent above the guideline, and so every year there's a guideline amount that the government puts out of what the rent increase will be, they have to apply to the Landlord Tenant Board to have a legally binding decision to do so. And that's called an above the guideline increase. Units built and rented for the first time since November 2018 are not protected under the same kind of rules as other units. There is no rent control, and the landlord is typically allowed to raise the rent as much as they want. So an example is if you're paying $1,800 this year and you live in a unit that wasn't occupied until December 2020, the landlord can potentially raise your rent to $2,300, and there's no issue with that. So it's something to be careful of and to be mindful of when you're renting, if at all possible. I'll just finish this slide out and then Danielle can go next, but the rent increase for 2022. So the rent freeze is ending December 31st, 2021. So as of January 1st, 2022, landlords can increase the rent by 1.2%. The 1.2% is the guideline amount for the year of 2022. And again, the landlord has to give you the proper written notice, which is 90 days before it takes effect. And so typically it's on an N1. However, if you have one of those units that was rented after November 2018, it could potentially be an N3. There's a couple other forms. So again, any questions, come into the clinic or give us a call and we will be happy to clarify.
Okay. I guess Ashley's throwing me under the bus now. Thanks, Ash. Amendments to the RTA. So as of September 2021, a tenant filing a tenant T5 application. A T5 application is a bad faith, if you received a bad faith application in 12 and 13, for personal use or that the purchaser was going to buy the property and move in. And the N13 is if they were going to demolish the unit or do extensive renovations and they needed you to be out of the unit. The T5 application is a tenant application a tenant would file if if they did move in good faith and found out that the landlord didn't fix the unit or sell it or move in, they re-rented it for a higher cost, the tenant can file a T5 application. If the landlord gave a notice of termination in bad faith, you can now ask the landlord and tenant board to order a landlord to pay up to 12 months rent and compensation, and you do not have to, it doesn't have to incur any actual expenses to make this claim. And the T5 application claiming that the landlord did not allow the tenant to move back in after the renovation or repairs were completed can now be filed up to 2 years after the tenant moving out. Previously, I believe that was only a year, but it's now moved to 2 years. And when we say the giving notice to move back in, what we're talking about is it's called first right of refusal. If you get the notice of, say, the N13 where the landlord's doing extensive renovations and you want to move back into that unit, you simply write to the landlord saying, I, tenant, plan on moving back into the unit after the renovations are done. And if the landlord can accept that. And what happens is the tenant can move back in for the same rent that they're paying, as though there's no interruption into the tenancy. So that's now 2 years. So that's good for tenants to be able to do that. Okay, COVID-19 related issues, LTB documents sent by email. The landlord tenant board is sending documents via email to minimize physical contact, where they're not sending it by Canada Post anymore. A lot of them will, if there is an email address on file. If there's not, you'll still get that document. They usually send it using the email because of COVID, of course. This includes your notice of hearing. We say check your junk drawers, make sure, or your junk drawers, not your junk drawers, your junk email, and say, double check that, it's there, because sometimes you will get it in your junk email and you'll actually miss your hearing. So check those. And if you have not provided the landlord and tenant board with your email address, then they will still send it to you. But if you're not living at the address that's on file, then you won't receive it and you could also miss your hearing as well. Documents being sent by regular mail still applies. They still send it to you. Hopefully you get it. Usually after 5 days of it being sent out, it's considered served. They will add that time onto your documents. And because it's being sent by mail, a lot of the times, even if you don't get it, they're saying that it was received, it wasn't returned back. So if you're not living there, hopefully someone will return it back. If not, you're deemed to have been served, and so you could miss your hearing. So watch your emails and watch your mailboxes. I'm going to keep going. Austin, you want to take over?
Yeah, no problem. So as Danielle was saying, a lot of things are moving online, and naturally that includes hearings for obvious reasons. So any in-person hearing was canceled long ago at this point. They've been all online for a while. They're done basically over Zoom exclusively. I think they might have experimented with Teams once upon a time, but it's largely just Zoom now. You can also call in via phone, but that is that's definitely a backup option in my experience, and I'm sure my colleagues would agree. People on phone definitely struggle a lot more compared to those who can use Zoom. The technology is not really built for it. So if you ever find yourself in an LTB hearing, you have an option. Zoom is infinitely superior. You get, thankfully, a notice of hearing that outlines all the information you need to access your hearing, on the including date, time, basic login instructions, that sort of thing. In terms of accommodation requests, the LTB, as any government organization, it tends to be, is very accommodating to those with disabilities, or maybe they have language barriers, but you need to give notice in advance. You can't show up the day of the hearing and expect any sort of special treatment. It's continuing on, there's applications and evidence. So in-person applications are largely discontinued. You are now encouraged to use e-filing systems or other forms of sort of remote systems as possible. Regular mail, faxing, if anyone does that, and courier mail. This has led to kind of longer processing times, but it is what it is. And the e-filing systems, especially, as I think most tenants will find, are fairly painless. So they've made that transition fairly well. Whenever you're dealing with mail, you always have to assume delays. So getting things out in a timely manner is more important than it has ever been. The biggest issue a lot of tenants face, and any tenant who goes to a hearing is bound to encounter this issue, is evidence. It used to be evidence was a lot simpler. You know, you could show up with it in a physical binder. It was a lot easier to pull it pieces out and show it to the adjudicator in your hearing. Now it's all email. And it's difficult. There's strict rules on sizes and file formats, stuff people who aren't computer savvy don't know the first thing about. And it's really difficult. And unfortunately, it's an area where the LTB could probably afford to be a bit more helpful in that regard. But again, it is what it is. Everyone's still transitioning due to COVID. It is definitely, if you ever have an LTB hearing and if you aren't computer savvy, enlist the help of a younger family member or someone who maybe is a bit more familiar with computers, because it makes a world of difference to getting your application heard and ensuring that you're able to tell your side of the story. Damages and security deposits, I'll keep going just to flow. So landlords are a bit limited in what they can actually ask for, even though it often looks like, you often get landlords asking for certain types of deposits. They're able to ask for a key deposit, but the key deposit must be returned when you return the keys, as you would expect. They are able to ask for a last month's rent deposit. And then there's rules surrounding how they're supposed to use that. If you know you're moving out, the last month's rent deposit's used for your last month. And there's forms you can file if you aren't given your last month's rent. It is a very complicated process, and it is one that tenants struggle with. If you're ever wondering, should I have been given this deposit back? Should I pay a deposit? Call a legal clinic before you do it. Once you part with your money, getting it back is hard. So it's much easier to, before you give anyone a check or some cash, call first to know if you should be paying that. And I'll do this one as well because they're connected. Ending a tenancy. Ending a tenancy isn't as easy as you might think, especially if both sides are maybe a bit hostile towards each other and one wants to make a fuss about it. So assuming you are on a sort of month-to-month lease and you don't have a fixed term, you can end a tenancy by giving 60 days notice, and the date will have to be the end of the rental period. So usually like a 31st. If you don't give that 60 days notice, and it can lead to issues, as again my colleagues would speak to, you get that a lot with landlords claiming the tenancy wasn't ended properly, charges for an extra month. And on that note, something else, this is very basic, but if you're on a fixed term tenancy, and what that means is you'll agree to live in a unit until a certain amount of time. When that term ends, the tenancy doesn't end. You transition to a month-to-month tenancy, and then you still have to end it formally. It doesn't end just because the lease ends, it rolls over. Ashley would probably be able to speak to this as well.
Yes, so notice to enter the unit. A landlord has to give you 24-hour written notice to enter the unit unless it's an emergency. So examples of an emergency would be your unit is flooding, they need to come in and immediately turn the water off, there's a fire, etc. So any kind of emergency, they are allowed to enter without notice. But in terms of just entering for inspections and stuff, 24-hour written notice must be given. They can only enter the unit between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., but the notice of entry has to give it a reasonable window and say why they're entering. So what is a reasonable window? The Landlord Tenant Board has found that a reasonable window would be, for example, kind of like the cable guy, between like 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. of entry, or between 1 and 3, I'm going to enter your unit for an inspection of the fire alarms, etc. So there has to be a specific window of time that's reasonable. So not 8 to 8, that's not considered reasonable. And there has to be a reason for why they're entering. So they can't just enter with no reason. They have to tell you why they're entering. They are allowed to provide notices monthly for damage inspections. If it's more than monthly and or you feel like it's gotten to the point of harassment, again, give us a call. We'll be happy to talk about your specific scenarios and what you can do about it. However, under the rules, you are not allowed to refuse entry to the landlord. So if your landlord has given you a proper 24-hour written notice and it has the reasons and the specific time that they're going to enter, they are allowed to enter whether you're home or not. So even if you've gone out, they can enter the unit. Even if you don't want them to enter, they are allowed to enter. If you prevent entry, what would happen is you could potentially get an eviction notice which should be an N5, which is a notice for interfering with the landlord's reasonable enjoyment of the unit. If you're not letting them enter for inspection purposes, you are interfering with their rights to inspect or do the work or whatever reason they're entering for. So do not just deny entry. If there's a COVID issue or any other questions, give us a call before you do that, and we're happy to walk you through it again. Every circumstance is different and every story is different, and we know that. So really, for one-on-one legal advice, give us a call or walk in. But just in general, if there's 24-hour written notice, they are allowed to enter, and it does not matter if you're home or not. Okay, so withholding rent. This is a big topic. So in the Residential Tenancies Act, there is nowhere that says a tenant can withhold rent for any reason. So what this means is you cannot withhold your rent for maintenance issues or tenant rights issues. So if there are maintenance issues, you need to put the issues in writing to your landlord. So an email, text message, old-fashioned letter, whatever works for you, just make sure you keep a copy of it. And you say, hey, landlord, my fridge is not working properly. I need you to come inspect it and fix it and get me a replacement. If you put that in writing and they don't fix it within a reasonable period, then you can file your own tenant applications with the Landlord Tenant Board. And what you would do is you would file the applications and you would seek a abatement of rent. So what that means is you would seek money back from the rent that you've already paid. The issue with withholding your rent, one of the issues, obviously you're putting yourself at risk for eviction as number one issue, but the other issue is if you have these maintenance issues and you've withheld your rent, in the end, all of the money is going to end up back with the landlord anyway, and any kind of abatement you would have sought is going to be paid to the landlord in unpaid rent. So it's much better and much easier to speak to us first, file your own applications, do not withhold rent, and then you can have your own hearing and not be at risk of eviction. Because again, if you withhold rent, you can receive an N4, which is a notice to end your tenancy for non-payment of rent. And we don't want that. We don't want anyone to put their tenancy at risk, especially during COVID times. So give us a call if you're having any maintenance or tenant rights issues. An example of tenant right issue would be harassment from the landlord, or interference with your heat or water or hydro. So give us a call if anything like that is going on, and we can tell you what specific forms you would need to file. And so this slide, tenant representation available is case-by-case basis. So at the Durham Community Legal Clinic, we did stop representation for a period of time. However, we are opening it back up slowly. So what this means is that every case comes in the door, we have to have a thorough look at it to determine if there's staff availability. And then one of us would sign a full retainer with you to represent you for your whole case at the Landlord Tenant Board. If we cannot do that, what we can do is offer you summary legal advice, which means that we would give you specific advice about your specific situation before you go to your hearing. And we may also be able to assist you with paperwork. So filling out your applications and or going over what the landlord has filed with you. So even if we can't represent, we can still assist you. And it's always best once you get a notice of hearing to come into the clinic, because we would love to look at it and determine whether we can assist you further or if we can refer you to somewhere else that can help. There's also resources in Durham for many different things. So definitely call the clinic or come in if you've gotten any kind of notice from your landlord. And then I will let Danielle give the ending speech, just giving our hours again and sort of going over the process when you call us. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Again, we are located at the Midtown, here it's called Midtown Center, but I'm from Oshawa. I've lived here my whole life, so I know it as Midtown Mall, which many residents of Durham also know it as that. We are currently operating in the office. We are there. We do have COVID protocols in place. What we do is we do have it set up where you will come in on a walk-in time, which is Monday to Thursday, 8:30 to 4. And you just come in. We ask you that you do the COVID screening that's outside the doors. If you can't do the COVID screening, we will do it on the inside with you. And then we will have you sit down, and it's one-on-one. So you may have to wait a little bit, as we are only letting one person in at a time. Once that client leaves, we'll ask you to come in, and we will have sanitized and everything in between clients. It's our safety and yours. So that's what we care about the most right now, and to make sure everybody is being safe. If at any time you want to come into the clinic, we have gloves and masks available. You are always allowed to come in and grab some of them. Also, like I said, the areas of law that we do are, of course, housing. We do social benefits, which is Ontario Works and ODSP, and we also do CPP disability as well. Another areas of law that we do, again, are WSIB. I didn't mention employment, so I will now. We do have an employment law, and we also do human rights. And again, we do have a hub partner with Durham College, and we also have many other agencies involved in our clinic within the region, such as, Community Development Council Durham. I actually got it right today, CDCD. We also deal with Backdoor Mission and John Howard Society. There are several other agencies that we can connect you with if you need those information. So please reach out, and we will be more than willing to sit down, have a conversation with you, see what you need. If we can't help, we will definitely find somebody who can. Again, come see us. And again, for your housing matters or anything else, you have these two wonderful people, Ashley and Austin, who can definitely assist you with that. And then anything ODSP or OW related, you can always contact me as well. And thank you very much for taking your time to sit with us tonight and listen to us just speak about what we do and your rights as a tenant. And like I said, and Ashley has said, I can't say it enough, any questions at all, definitely give us a call, and we will do our very best to answer that. And again, thank you for sitting with us on a Wednesday night. And if you, again, any questions, chat's open. And Julia, thank you for organizing this week. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much to Ashley and Danielle and Austin for your presentation this evening. I really appreciate it, and you shared some really great information for tenants. I wanted to mention that the Durham Community Legal Clinic will be at the Ajax Library next Wednesday on Harwood Avenue from 10 to 2. They'll have a table set up, and they'll be there to answer questions and provide some resources. So definitely I would encourage anyone interested to stop by. I'm now going to stop the recording and open it up and see if there's any questions.